Hey everybody, this video is going to cover some useful tips for programming hi-hats into your beats. For a lot of music producers, the process of making these patterns sound professional and original can be kind of daunting, and this video will give you some useful tips to make your tops more interesting and faster. All of the MIDI patterns you see in this video can also be found in this sample pack here. You can check the link in the description for more info. And later in the video, I'll be sure to tag a discount code so you can pick this up for just a few bucks. But for now, let's get into the video and check out these tips. So this one might seem obvious, but for most people opening a DAW, in this case we're looking at software like Ableton Live, your session opens up typically at 120 BPM by default. So let's just increase the tempo to something like 140. When you listen to the click, this might sound fast to us, but we do this to actually make our lives easier when programming drum patterns, especially hi-hats. By using a faster BPM, we have easier access to smaller subdivisions of the beat. For instance, here let's make a simple pattern of hi-hats that rests on every single eighth note present in the measure, and then we'll loop this idea so you can actually hear it with a typical snare pattern. I actually like to call these straight patterns just because they have a simplicity to their rhythm, and simplicity oftentimes can be your friend in music production. Even though hi-hat patterns can get very complicated, especially in trap or other styles of music, they don't have to be. And sometimes the biggest songs or the best ideas tend to have very simple hi-hats. And then if you want to add some interest, you can start here and then start inserting more hi-hats in between those notes. And those would be the 16th notes. So that's why we use the higher BPM. I think something you also want to be aware of is using a loop region in whatever DAW you're using. So in Ableton Live, you see here on the screen, I would create a loop region by making a selection across those 4 or 8 bars. Hold down Control L based on that selection, or Command L on Mac. That creates a loop region. In something like Pro Tools, you would have a similar idea where you select something on the arrangement screen, or the edit screen they call it, and it would create that loop region, or you drag across the timeline at the top, which is very similar for FL Studio. Anyway, make a loop region because you want the music flowing, especially when you start introducing other drum elements, which a lot of hi-hat patterns are based off that idea, right? So you have percussion samples, shakers, reverse elements, other cymbals, claps, snares. It's almost like anything else in music production. Balance is really the most important consideration. So everything's in context. So consider addition and subtraction as your tools so you can find those interesting ideas with your patterns within the scope of everything else you could have in a beat like this. So notice how I'm not using the sample within the arrangement view of my track. In other words, I'm not just dropping the sound file onto the arrangement view and then copy and pasting it. Unless you're working in Pro Tools, people tend to do that a lot in there. There's probably a strong likelihood that you're using a sampler instrument to trigger the actual sound file that you've loaded into it. So even in FL Studio, you drag and drop it in, it uses the sampler instrument. This means that it's giving you the piano roll to allow you to trigger the sample, not just with different subdivisions of the beat, but different pitches. So we're doing pitch modulation. That's what you see me doing here. I'm moving the pitch around to create these variations. This is very typical in trap. There's probably been times when you've been listening to a track and it felt like the producer was using a lot of different hi-hats within the track, doing some real complex stuff with a bunch of different samples, but the reality could have been he or she was just modulating the pitch of 1 or 2 hi-hats. And then if you do decide to use more than one hi-hat sample, which is totally fine, you'll notice that if you put those things onto the same rack VST, so in this case in Ableton it's the drum rack, triggering multiple samples on one instrument essentially takes away the ability to use pitch modulation on the piano roll, because that was predicated upon using just one sample, right? So people run into that issue. My answer has always been just use automation. So in Ableton Live, we hit caps lock A. So you want to hit the capital A button. It goes into automation mode. All the red lines appear. You just select the transpose button on the drum rack, simpler module in the drum rack. And then on the arrangement screen, you can go in and move the nodes around and make those changes. And every other DAW has its own way of doing automation, but basically that's what you would do. You would have the rack VST triggering multiple samples, but then you would go and put in that detail of the pitch modulation using just pitch automation. So it's always good to learn about automation lanes in your DAW of choice, and that's what you can see me doing here. Another thing I would point out is that you can use 30-second notes when you're making a track. So that's going to give you more of those glitchy style effects. You can see me doing that here. And that's where we get into the smaller subdivisions of making these kind of trap-oriented hi-hat patterns. And then putting usually some higher pitch change into those smaller subdivisions is always a good idea, because it creates a kind of a nice sort of lighter sound to the faster subdivisions, right? So when you want to make something a really fast subdivision like 30-second notes or 64th notes, if you bring the pitch up, it makes that subdivision still kind of lighter sounding for the hi-hat. And that's a neat little trick that I found. Has a nice sound to it. And obviously right there you could hear I was using some triplet patterns as well. So in Ableton you can change your grid mode to triplet grid mode by holding Control 3 or Command 3. I think in FL Studio you change the grid mode to 1/3 or something like that. But basically using triplet 16ths, triplet 32nd notes, those are also really common in trap music. So a lot of fun possibilities you can come up with using those different techniques that we talked about in the video. And as a producer, you're obviously going to make patterns that take all the other elements into consideration, like the kick drum pattern, the bass, the way the vocalist sings or raps on the track, and maybe the melody sample that you have in the track. So I just think these tips can help kickstart your inspiration, especially if you're new to beat making and you're feeling a little overwhelmed, like how do I get that variety or get that sound that I hear in the trap records that are out today. And you can also pick up the patterns that you saw in this video. I've got a pack out, 25 MIDI patterns, 10 one-shots, I think 65 prepared loops that you can just drag and drop right into your session. It's all royalty free. There's actually a link in the description to that pack. And because you stuck around and watched the end of the video, you can get this discount code here. And it basically makes the pack less than the price of a cup of coffee. So definitely consider checking that out. Help support the channel. It means a lot to me. Helps me make more videos for you guys. If you're new to the channel, make sure you go to the Gumroad store. Link is in the description to that storefront. It's an awesome place. You'll find a bunch of free products to enjoy as well. Some of these things are eventually going to be gone from the storefront soon to make room for other new content I have coming in. So yeah, be sure to check that out. If you're new here, hit the like button and subscribe, and leave a comment below if some of these ideas in this video inspired you in some kind of way. I always like to hear from you guys and what you're working on. And yeah, I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.